You may or may not have heard of the story of Jesus walking on water. It is one of my most favorite stories in the New Testament for so many reasons. If you haven't heard of this story, Jesus' disciples, or people who followed Jesus during his ministry, were on a boat when suddenly a humongous storm came. Waves were gushing into the boat. The wind was blowing at an incredible speed. And then all of a sudden, they saw something in the distance and they thought it was a ghost. But as the person got closer, they noticed it was Jesus. They were terrified for so many reasons. And they thought, how can this be? Jesus walking on water. And Jesus, being Jesus, reassured them to not be afraid and looked at Peter and said, do not be afraid, for I am here. And Peter, one of his disciples, was so amazed at what was going on. He said, if you are Jesus, call me to you and I will walk on the water. So Jesus said, mainly, I am he, come to me. And Peter just got out of the boat and began walking on water. He kept his eyes so focused on Jesus that he was able to do a miracle. But then he got distracted by all of the chaos that was happening around him. He loses his focus on Jesus and started to sink. Jesus saw this and quickly pulled Peter out of the water and asked him this, why did you doubt me? Peter and Jesus got back into the boat with the other disciples, and then suddenly Jesus just calmed the storm. The waves stopped, the wind calmed, the sun probably came out. It was at that point that Jesus' disciples worshipped him and said, you are really the Son of God. At this time, Jesus' disciples have been following him for a while now. And they saw him do miracles and heal the sick. And yet it took all the disciples for Jesus walking on the water to proclaim and understand that he is the Son of God. I love this story because we all can relate to Peter. When we become Christians and start our journey of faith, we have our eyes on Jesus. But as we continue and get closer to him and more intimate with him, we tend to get distracted about the things that are happening around us. For Peter, that was the storm, the waves, the wind, and he began sinking. For us, the storm is society and everyday life. And the more distracted we get with things, fear, anxiety, depression, and so many feelings begin coming into our life. For Peter, he probably felt fear from the rain and anxiety when he was beginning to sink. Then Peter began to sink, and I can only imagine complete fear overcame his mind and soul. Similar to what happens to us. Have you ever focused on something so much that you began feeling anxiety and fear about something? I know I definitely have. For Peter, it was sinking. For us, it could be telling our parents we had a bad grade on a test, or really just anything in your life that gives you fear and anxiety. If we focus too much on that, we get distracted from Jesus. When Peter began sinking, Jesus quickly grabbed him, helped him up, and regained his focus. Jesus does this in our lives all the time. He lets us sink a little bit, but not too much, then quickly grabs us by the hand and pulls us out of situations. We just have to call on him. And then once we are out, he refocuses our eyes back on him. Peter doubted Jesus for a minute and got distracted by the storms. Have you ever doubted God? I know I definitely have during tough seasons, especially when the global pandemic hit. I doubted and questioned God so many times, but he came through, and my faith is stronger than it has ever been. How amazing is that? I just love how we can all relate to Peter in some type of way. Another reason why I find this story fantastic is the ending. What the disciples say once Peter is saved and once the storm stops. They say, "You really are the Son of God." As I said earlier in the video, the disciples have seen and walked with Jesus for a good period of time at this point. They saw him walk on water, but they also saw Jesus heal a paralyzed man, a man from leprosy, and other miracles that no one could explain. The disciples saw these things firsthand. It was not the first time Jesus calmed the storm too, when the disciples were present. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 to 27, a few chapters before Peter was saved, Jesus was crossing a lake with the disciples when a storm came. Jesus was asleep, but woke to the disciples crying, "Lord, save us. We are going to drown." Jesus responded in Matthew 8:26, "Why are you afraid? You have little faith." He got up and rebuked the winds and waves, and suddenly everything was calm. Now, when Peter was saved by Jesus, they proclaimed that Jesus was the Savior, the Son of God, and they truly believed. But in the first time that Jesus rebuked the storm, the disciples said something different. In Matthew 8:27, the disciples were amazed and said, "Who is this man? Even the winds and waves obey him." They didn't proclaim that he was the Son of God when he rebuked the storm the first time. It wasn't until they saw him walk on water, save Peter from the storm, that they were like, "Oh my goodness, he is the Son of God." And I think it's because Jesus allowed Peter to do what he was doing, to walk on water. And no human could do that. So I think it was just very mind-opening for them. And Jesus walking on water in the middle of the storm should give everyone peace, because they can know that we are never alone in a storm and that Jesus is always with us. Sometimes as believers, we sometimes think that we're not going to face hardship, that we are not going to face storms, but honestly, any area of our life, a storm can arise any moment. In health, financial, friendships, our relationship with God, as that's what the enemy wants to do. The enemy wants us to get distracted and not go to Jesus. We all have storms in our life, and we have to admit it, but we also have peace in knowing that we are never alone in a storm. Just like the disciples were not alone, we are not. During hardships and during the storms, we should rejoice, because the storms are a way that God tests our faith and lets us know what our fears are. We all have a promise from Jesus, the man who walked on water, even calmed the storms. That promise is that Jesus is always with us. Even in the eye of a storm, Jesus is always with us and will never let us drown. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Happy Sunday and stay blessed.